Okay.
In other words, physicists, astronomers, all of the scientists who are studying these phenomena, they look into the darkness of space and they say, we see something going into a point in space. It looks as if matter is being destroyed, eaten up. We see coming out of that flares of light, radiation. So they see what's going in and what's coming out.
Right.
And the only way to explain it is something like a black hole.
Right.
And they say the black hole then must act in this particular way. So what I'm saying is the psychoplasm is in this field of reincarnation studies. We don't know exactly how it works.
Right.
But we know that it produces these effects.
The effects, yeah.
And so you have a cause, a past, a mechanism, and the effect. Now, I use the word psychoplasm simultaneously with the term soul genome, because I think what we're talking about is a scientific, down-to-earth notion of what people have called soul in the past. The reason they don't have a very good definition of what the soul is because we haven't really studied how it works in our own human down-to-earth lifetimes.
Right.
And what I'm trying to do is to bring that, as I said, this notion, heavenly notion, down to earth. Because if it's real, you know, it affects all of us. All of us have had this aspect of evolution and reincarnation in our own birth and development, and hopefully the predisposition and the legacy we have from a previous life will be improved by our education, learning, experience that we pass on to the next generation.
Okay, now you have a thing called the Reincarnation Experiment, and it's at www.reincarnationexperiment.org. Now, what is that all about?
Well, this is a website. First of all, you know, we published the book which describes the pilot study. I have a lot of cases in the book that describe people living today that we strongly believe, if reincarnation is real, those people living today are the most likely reincarnations of individuals that we've identified in the past. Some of them are historical figures, well-known figures. Marilyn Monroe is one of them. James Madison, our fourth president, is another one. One is a Navy seaman who died in a crash in 1933, who's now a Navy captain in this lifetime. We have a lot of cases that are of different types to suggest this. So if those cases are real, we want to explain it to the public and the website, and we want to invite other people who may have never seen a psychic, never seen a psychologist, never been a part of any study like this, but they have memories, they have habits that their parents tell them reflect the habits of an ancestor. Any kind of connection that people might have.
I know it builds a lot of interest for people when it's some historical figure or famous person from the past. But why is there so much focus given on those cases? Is it just because you have more information about them?
Well, that's exactly the
Okay.
question. In our pilot study, we had some ordinary people who have no you know, big public resume that everybody knows about. And they had some past lives that are, you know, a soldier in the Confederate Army during the Civil War.
So the vast majority are not known figures.
They're not known figures.
They couldn't be, obviously.
Couldn't be.
Yeah.
And so what we do, though, to prove the model, you need to have information. You need to have some portraits or images of them, and those are people who are fairly well known or fairly well off in a previous lifetime. You have to know something about the way they think and so on. They have to have written something, or other people might have written something about them, or they could have been an artist that painted, or a musician that composed music or wrote lyrics. In other words, to have some information that could be considered accurate evidence of how that person lived and worked and what he or she was capable of doing. So we took the famous cases because we've got a lot to compare.
Yeah.
And then that proves then, though, this symmetry between the lifetimes. What we
Right.
can do with a person who's never even thought about a previous life is to look at the way we are now in terms of how we grew up as children, what our physical features are, the way we thought of ourselves at a very young age, the kinds of things we did as a young person before we got too much into doing things the way the current society does it.
Right.
And you can develop a profile or a picture of what that legacy is from the previous life.
Right.
And then with hints of suggestions of possible names, and we've got a number of people who've had their own sort of sense. Well, I feel close to that person.
Yeah.
Could be a relative, it could be someone you've never known, it could be only a kind of person. But that starts the research.
And with about 6 billion people on Earth, and I've heard it said that that's more people than have ever lived in human history.
Right.
So where did they reincarnate from if there's no, or are there people elsewhere that we don't know about?
Right. Well, if you think there could be people elsewhere. That's another topic. But first of all, it's an assumption to say that this number of people have not lived before.
Right.
Because we don't know how many people lived before the cataclysm, the flood of.
We don't know how many cavemen there were, right?
Well, we don't know how many people lived before that time, and after the cataclysm, about 11,500 years ago, you had only survivors. So we had small groups of tribes and people around the world.
Right.
And there are a lot of stories of civilizations prior to this period. I mean, Atlantis and others, and I don't want to get into that discussion at this point. But
Right.
we really, it's an argument that doesn't hold up, given that we don't really know what the past has been.
Yeah.
So I think that, and also when you look at the fact of reincarnation, you have an evolving process in all species. And if it happens in all species, there is some way of we divide our DNA, we divide our learning, we pass it on to new physical beings, so that you continue this legacy, this evolutionary, what I call it's the evolutionary conservation of consciousness, of knowledge and experience and knowing. Just like you can't in physics, you can have energy and matter, and you can't destroy either one. You can change that from one form to the other.
Right.
Well, I would argue that consciousness is the same way. You can't really destroy it. It's either incarnate in the physical realm, or it is disincarnate in another dimension, in a more ethereal dimension.
So, so is this quantum physics? Is that the model that kind of could explain?
Well, quantum physics is supportive of this notion, because quantum physics, first of all, tells us that everything fundamentally is energetic and information. And so that what we consider to be a physical incarnation of an organism is really composed of quanta of energy that flash in and out of existence. And so I don't want to say it's exactly the same thing, but I would say for the soul genome or the psychoplasm, it's like a particle. The particle may be a wave of light, or an energy wave, an electromagnetic wave, or some wave that's not electromagnetic. And then in quantum physics, it manifests as a particle in a moment in time and place. And I would suggest that if you think in terms of, as we seem to know from studying nature, as above, so below, the same sort of model, it seems to me, can apply to the notion of the soul genome or the psychoplasm.
So did the book almost be titled Psychoplasm? Was that a close second?
Well, I didn't want to use psychoplasm because that's a
everybody knew what soul was.
That's a scientific term that suggests this sort of mechanism that I talked about. Excuse me. But the soul genome, the soul is not usually connected in the public's mind with the genome, because the genome is usually thought of as a physical set of DNA that we get transmitted from our parents and so on. but by tying the two together, we're suggesting